Hey, this is Doug from Foscale Models, and in this video we're going to show you how to make this concrete wall in the back. It's a retaining wall, and it's cast in hydrocal plaster, but we've also added some utility cables that usually follow along the right-of-way of a railroad. So we're going to show you how to weather and color the wall, as well as add those cables. The first thing I want to show you before we start working on the walls, this is the molds after, of course, the casting has been taken out. This is just 3/16 inch foam core. You start with a flat base and make the perimeter of your wall, draw out the dimensions, and then create the height. We made this about 3/8 of an inch high, or 3/8 of an inch thick, rather, and that determines the height. So we just pour our plaster in and then skim it with a spackle knife, and we get a nice flat wall. But one of the things you'll notice here, we wanted a little reveal at the top of the wall, an overhang, which often occurs in these kind of walls. It's just a nice little detail. It gives it some scale and breaks up the monotony of just a plain slab. So to do that, we make our entire mold here, but then we drop in a piece of styrene everywhere except just shy of the top of the wall. So this leaves us about 1/4 of an inch of a recess, so the plaster will pour down there, and that gives us our little reveal that goes the entire length of the wall. This is the straight section over here, so that you can see the same thing. There's a sheet of styrene here, and then it drops slightly to give us the reveal at the top of the wall. So if you see at the end of the wall how much that comes out, it's just the thickness of the styrene, which is probably less than 1/16 of an inch. The first step in coloring these walls is getting rid of the white plaster look, and we're using a driftwood stain here. This is from a Hunter line, and this is a nice grayish black wash. That we're going to cover all of this anyway, but if you do miss a spot, we don't want any of the white to show through. Okay, so now I'm adding some cracks. I'm turning and pivoting as I go. I'm not just drawing a crisscross of lines, because cracks in concrete and stone don't work like that. They work a little bit more lightning, where they just kind of branch off into this more natural looking line. And to get these cracks right, you might want to just look at real cracks in walls and stone and stuff, just to give you an idea. One of the things where you have two of these cracks meeting, a lot of times a divot will form just from water dripping down the crack and piling up here, and then it'll start to just erode at this material. Another tool you can use is a dental pick. It's just got a different point and a different thickness of crack. Okay, the next step is to paint it an actual concrete color, and this is a chalkboard paint, so it's got a flat finish. This is a Cocoon color. It's from Art Minis, from Michaels. It's a very common brand of acrylic paint that you can get. And it's just the right color for what we want to do as a base to these concrete walls. Okay, the next step after we've got our concrete color down is to add some gray color, some streaks, and just for more variety in the concrete. These are two acrylic colors. These are Martha Stewart colors from Michaels, I believe. This is Arrowhead gray, and this is Gray Wolf. And they're two similar grays, but one's lighter than the other. Start applying the color as if we were painting the wall, but you want to go streaking downwards only. And it doesn't have to be super neat, because we're going to go back with this color after all this is in. Now it's at these stages that it always looks pretty bad. It doesn't look like it's going to be anything slightly realistic or or like concrete or whatever, but it's the layering effect of all these steps that you really only see at the end when we're done. Okay, so this is the first pass with that light gray color. And it looks pretty awful. Doesn't look like anything you'd want on your model railroad yet. Not that this next color won't make it much better, but it gets us closer actually where we want to be. Basically, if you look at some real, examples of weathered walls and buildings and stuff, you'll see that it's never just one color, and that's always the idea in doing this kind of modeling. It's always, whether it's a locomotive or a structure or scenery, it's always a layered technique, because that is the only thing that makes it look realistic and duplicate what's in nature. So I'm kind of dry brushing almost. I'm not using a lot on the brush. I'm just kind of hitting the surface most of the time. I mean, I'll apply it, you could apply a lot there and then pick up your pressure. And I'm moving pretty fast, so I'm just skimming the surface. And this is not sped up, it's just I'm doing it really fast because I don't want my brush to linger too long on the surface, which is why I'm getting these nice variegated streaks. So it very much is like dry brushing, except on occasion I'll use more paint than you would with dry brushing to get these darker areas. The other thing is, if you put too much paint on, you can always bring it back by going back to our base color, that Cocoon chalk paint, which we're going to do anyway, just to do some blending. Okay, so now I've got loaded on my brush again, the concrete color. And I'm just going to dry brush. I'm going to take off some paint and kind of come back a bit. Again, this is all about pressure too, so I'm just kind of hitting it lightly or hitting it not at all. I'm just kind of hovering over the material. And this kind of helps blend in the colors a bit. I always start off on the off the material onto a scrap with my table, just so I can get the momentum going. And then when I hit the material, I won't be putting too much paint on. Okay, so I've brushed on the concrete color over the entire surface of these two wall sections. And you can see now the two other colors underneath, it's all kind of blending in a little bit better. I'm going to do a little bit more work with a sponge this time. This is a grout sponge you can get at Home Depot. And now I'm using that light gray color again, which is Gray Wolf. And this kind of mixes up the look of the brush streaks, which we really don't want, with a more mottled kind of effect from the sponge texture. So wherever the brush work looks too brushy or brush-like, I guess, I'm just kind of going back again with my sponge And this is subtle. We don't have to do the whole thing. We could take some of our dark color as well. Don't ever let the first application of the sponge be on your material. Do it off to the side on scrap, just to unload some of the paint, because more likely it will be too much paint. You can see here it's very brush-like. It looks like I painted it with a giant brush, which I did, and I don't want it to look like that. So the sponge with the darker color will kind of break that down a bit. And what's nice is the texture of the sponge also lends itself to the texture of the dirt pattern that we cast into the wall. So it just kind of extends that three-dimensional look of the crumbling concrete. So we're going to make one more pass with the sponge, except I'm back to my concrete color. And I'm just going to knock down a couple of the darker spots that are a little too dark maybe. So I could bring it back to a more even color with the concrete color. So now I'm going to take my black wash again, and I'm going to go over everything that we just did. And this will bring out more of the cracks that we might have filled in a bit with the paint. Maybe the wash will settle in some of the spots. And this also helps blend everything back together. So I've got the wall in place, and this is just a temporary check. That Sharpie obviously is holding the wall up temporarily. And I just wanted to get a look at how it's looking with some of the other existing elements. Even having this here helps, and the box car, just to see how the weathering kind of matches up and how it's looking with the color. And it looks pretty good. We still need to do more to it, but it's a nice start. You can certainly stop at this point. It's a perfectly acceptable wall. I mean, it's good, but there are a few more little things we could do to make it look better. Okay, we're gonna put some rust streaks on this wall. The rust comes from the rebar that's inside the wall that reinforces the wall. So it could come from any cracks, it could come from the top, it could come from these crumbling holes. So you want to be a little strategic about it. So we'll do it a few ways. This is an enamel paint from AK. This is light rust wash. This is going to be applied but thinned with mineral spirits. So I'm going to try that first. And I'm using a pretty fine brush, so that makes a difference. And bring a streak down. And this is kind of wide. It's about a 1/4 inch wide there. You can see that. And I'm going to take the color off my brush, and then I'm going to go back up, and I'm kind of removing the paint but bringing it up in a sweeping curve. And go down a bit too. The idea is you want to get this to be like a thin hairline that just kind of vanishes down the bottom. And I want to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm turning it upside down just so I can work with the camera here. And I want to work on making most of this pretty thin, and then kind of curve up to the top there. So if I don't have enough, I'll put some back up here. I just want it to curve. And I really want it to sort of vanish so it doesn't reach the entire length of the wall. You can try this with acrylic, but I think these enamels work best. Just because you can thin it with the mineral spirits. You could do it with water, but the water tends to kind of stick around. The mineral spirits evaporate. Now, there's a series of cracks here. The rust will come down, find a crack, come down a little off to here, and it kind of travels. So it wouldn't come down vertically over those cracks without wandering a little bit to the left or to the right. So now we have these wide streaks, but again, we want to do the same thing. We're going into our mineral spirits. I'm going to just drag this up or down and thin out that streak so it's sort of a hairline. We're making them disappear. Okay, the next step or the next type of rust we can apply is with chalk powder. This is weathering powder. These are from Bragdon Enterprises. And it's a fine powder in different colors. We're using the same color, but it just offers a little bit of it's a little bit of variety. It's got a little bit more vibrance to it, and you can apply it a little differently. And maybe not for streaks, but just kind of an overall pattern of rust. And also with the chalks, there's a few different colors, which also adds some variety to it. The next application is we use AK's dark streaking grime. And this is just a very dark wash. It's got like a green-gray. And we especially like to use it under the cap here of the concrete. And again, we're also diluting it with mineral spirits a bit, especially when we put it on too heavy. And we can even let it drip down a little bit. And we can also apply it the same way we applied the rust streaks, by putting down a wide band and then taking it back with just a thin hairline. The next step we like to add is some moss deposits. This is also from AK, and it's to add some green algae at the bottom of the wall mostly, where water would drip and hit the ground and just kind of build up there and sit in the sun and turn into some algae that lives on the wall. So this is it's a subtle line at the bottom, and it's irregular. It's not a straight line like a low tide for a seawall. It's a little different. It goes up a little bit, and then there's spots where you might not have any, and it'll just make the wall a little grounded. It'll look like it's actually in the ground. So the ground is coming up, the wall is going down, and they live together sort of in this in-between spot. And if you don't add that to the wall, or even like a structure where you add mud splatter, it's not as convincing. But with this little bit of green, it looks like it's actually in the ground. Okay, now I've got the wall back in place. Again, this is another check to see how we're looking and how it blends in with some of the other elements that are there. And obviously we still need to ballast some of this track over here, and then vegetation where the wall meets the ballast and that sort of thing. But we want to do a few more details to this wall, so we're going to do that next. Okay, so now we're going to add some cabling, utility cable that'll be strung up along the wall here. These cables usually follow the right-of-way along the tracks into junction boxes and then go into signal relays and whatever else the railroad needs to run it electrically. We've already done this section just to show you where we're going with this. We've got these little brackets here, and these we laser cut, which we'll make available if someone's interested in purchasing them. We'll put them up on the site. It's basically a little bracket with 5 holes for the cable, and it just gets glued against the wall. And then we can run our cables into a little piece of scrap chipboard or styrene to make junction boxes, and they kind of wander off here and there, and we'll add another one here. But I'll show you how to do it, how we did it rather. And we're using this wire, which is dark annealed steel wire. It's 24 gauge, so it's about less than a 32nd of an inch diameter. And it's already black, which is great because we didn't want to go through the trouble of having to color this wire. It's just another thing. We've colored these with a black Sharpie marker. It just makes it easier than trying to paint them with a brush. Just color them on both sides. So we're using a tweezer to grab a hold of these very tiny brackets. And we're going to just dip them into some Loctite or Crazy Glue or CA glue. And we're going to use a jig to measure the spacing between the brackets. Okay, we have all of our brackets in place. You can see, I don't know if you can, but you can see the little holes in there to feed the wire through. So we're going to actually start at this end. Just take off a section of wire that's probably an inch longer than you need, just in case. So we're just going to start feeding it through each of the bracket holes. Might want to use tweezers just to get it going. We'll leave it a little longer at the end here so we can make sure we can join it with the other section properly. Now I know I'm going to probably put a junction box here, so I'm just going to bend this one straight away. It'll probably end up here, but at least right now I know it won't fall through my hole and I don't have to rethread. So I'm repeating the process on the next hole. So I've got 3 cables in now, and I've cut them here so they're flush because I'm going to put some kind of junction box here. But I want to glue them down, so I'm going to hit it with a little glue here. It's a little CA. It's a little sloppy, but this is all going to get covered again with probably some rust and stuff, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to hold it down until it dries. So you can see the wires in here now, and one of the nice things about this wire is we can put a little sag in it, just a little bit of a bend. Being careful not to break the brackets off. I kind of just hold one of the brackets down a little bit if I can, or both. And now I've got a little bit of sag to show that the wire has some weight. You can kind of see the difference there. Okay, these cables terminate here, so I need some kind of box. So I have this metal casting. It's a small little locker box that we carry. I'm just going to pop him there. And there's just a little access to those cables. So we've added another section of cable with another box here. And to make these little boxes, they're just, whatever material you're working with. Like this is 1/32 inch laser cut material, or there's laser board or styrene. It's just literally a rectangle. You could get a little more elaborate and put a door on it, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. You just color it with a black Sharpie marker, and then take a silver Sharpie marker and just kind of hit the edges a little bit. And it'll look like the black paint is peeling off of a galvanized metal box. Once all our boxes and our brackets are done, you can add a little bit of rust with a very small brush at each bracket and the boxes as well. So that's it for our concrete wall with our utility cables. The wall itself, weathering is not that difficult. The cables are a little bit of a challenge, but it's a unique detail that I think is worth the time and effort to give it a try. See you next time.